All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the end of life preparations for people living with HIV and other pre-existing conditions and community members without life insurance. I'm Destiny, the media strategist for Seeds of Healing, and Seeds of Healing is an HIV awareness and advocacy organization whose mission is to deconstruct myths that perpetuate HIV stigma. Our work seeks to eliminate disparities for Black women living with HIV. So this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on our SoTime platform and posted to our YouTube channel for you to share with others or come back to watch yourself. Attendees are able to drop questions in the chat box throughout the entire program, and they'll be shared at the end of the webinar. But these will not be anonymous if you use the chat. So if you want to ask an anonymous question, please use the Q&A feature. But please feel welcome to ask questions and write comments throughout the entire program. Additionally, at the end of the webinar, we will be sharing a very short survey, so we would appreciate if you took a couple of moments to complete that. And before the webinar begins, please welcome our panelists today. We have Javoke Terrell, who has been a licensed funeral director and embalmer for over 30 years. He's the owner of Davis Funeral Home of Wilmington, Davis Funeral Home of Brunswick County, and Saunders Funeral Home of Jacksonville. Javoke and his wife Jennifer are actively involved in the communities in which they serve, and he's the father of 4 sons and has 1 grandson. He is a member of the Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church and serves as the deacons in ministry. And today our moderator is Ashley Daniels. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our panel.
Thank you, Destiny.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Terrell. How are you doing?
I'm great, Ashley. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. And thank you for joining us this evening.
It's quite the honor to come out and be of assistance to you all. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I want to start by sharing a few statistics regarding end-of-life planning and funeral preparation. So according to the National Funeral Directors Association, the median cost of funerals in 2021 was $7,848. The National Funeral Directors Association reported that 89.2% of funeral homes in the United States were privately owned by families or individuals. The term life insurance provider Ethos reported that only 32% of Americans surveyed said that they were comfortable discussing end-of-life planning. Ethos also reported that only 25% of people have made a will and only 18% have written down their last wishes. As a 30-year funeral home professional, do any of these statistics resonate with your experience?
Yes, Ashley, definitely do. All of them. We are, the cost of final expense or funeral arrangements certainly rises every year, and more so within the last 4 to 5 years. With inflation being what it is and the cost of goods going up, it has certainly impacted funeral homes and their ability to provide the service and maintain low costs. As it relates to having the conversation, being prepared for a will, that is also accurate because people just do not prepare. And you'd be surprised at the number of people who, they'll discuss it. They know they have assets and things that in the event of their passing would need to be secured. But there's a stigma as it relates to dying, and people just refuse to have that conversation. And also in reference to being properly insured, the numbers are surprisingly low.
Yeah. How did you come to choose this field of work?
So for me, I had this uncanny desire to be in the funeral home from a very, very young age. A good friend of mine in my hometown of Houston, Texas, her parents owned the funeral home that really serviced all the members of my church. And as kids, we played there after school, and on the weekends, we were there at the funeral home because they lived there. And the interest just grew over the years, and I was hooked. And so death care has been my profession. It's the only thing that I've ever done. And I'm, quite honored to be a part of it.
Yeah. Can you share the common concerns of families and reasons why end-of-life preparation discussion is important?
So the common concern of families when it comes to end of life is, how are we going to be prepared? And again, we go back to having that conversation.
Yeah.
The question is in their minds. They know that inevitably it's going to happen, but there is this stigma or fear with having a conversation with a spouse, with children, with family members, to discuss what needs to happen when I pass away. So again, it is just the stigma, and the concern is always there, because people inevitably they know that this is something they're gonna have to take care of, but they refuse to have the conversation.
Yeah. So kind of a continuation, what are the different ways that individuals can make end-of-life accommodations? And why do you think there is so much stigma? Why do you think people avoid it?
Well, so I'll start with some of the ways. So some of the ways that you can take care of end of life concerns. You certainly can meet with a funeral director and pre-plan your services. There's a difference between pre-planning and pre-paying. So with pre-planning, that is where you meet with a funeral director, you sit down, you provide all of your biographical information, you make selections, you discuss how you would want your services carried out. And those things are written down. You receive a copy, and the funeral home will maintain a copy. And more commonly, we'll give the individual 2 copies, one for their retention, and we ask them to give a copy to a trusted family member or friend. And one of the things we do advise against is, with these special documents, and it's with all documents, whatever you do, do not put it in a safety deposit box. Because unfortunately, when you pass away, safety deposit box, no one has access to it.
Right.
So that's just a little side note. Again, place your proper documents in the hands of someone or in a safe place, but definitely do not put them in safety deposit box. But and so in order to accomplish this, it's a hard conversation, but it must be had. And so I think the best way to do it is to, schedule a meeting with your family. If you don't have family, you schedule a meeting with the funeral director or a trusted friend. And together, you all meet with the director, go over all of your wishes, again, creating a list of everything that's to take place when the time comes, and then share with the funeral director and your trusted friend or family member, how will these services that you're pre-planning be paid for? Okay. Now, the other piece that I mentioned was to prepay for your funeral. And so that follows the same line of information that I shared previously. But in addition to just having everything written, arrangements are made to pay for those services in advance. And that really is the more suitable way to ensure that everything that you wish, everything that you desire can be accomplished and will be accomplished, because you've already made the plans and you've already made the payment for it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for making that designation between pre-planning and prepaying. I think I've heard of people sitting down with their families or sitting down on their own and writing, what they want the service to look like, or what songs or who they want to sing.
Yes.
But I haven't actually heard of people going in, to a funeral home and sitting down with the director and making plans that way. So thank you for that
You're welcome. Sure.
So Along the lines of payment, once an advance payment is made for funeral arrangements, is the cost locked in even if your price increases?
So with inflation, the sole purpose of doing the prepaid plan is to keep the cost from increasing. So the monies must be put into a specific account so that it would keep up with the cost of inflation, so that your family is not responsible for an increase. Should the funeral home's costs go up, they're covered. Traditionally, for years, funeral homes used a trust account in a bank to house pre-need funds. And over the years, that is where there's been a disconnect because unfortunately, banking has taken a severe hit, over the last 10, 12 years. And so interest rates just aren't there to keep up with the cost of inflation. So that is why if anyone watching today, if they're interested in prepaying, sit with your director and make sure that your funds are being placed in an insured product so that you can be certain that your family is not going to be liable for any additional costs 10, 15, 20 years from now, because the growth from that product is going to keep up with inflation.
Okay. And do families receive a guarantee for the funds that are given in preparation for afterlife accommodations?
Oh, definitely. If you receive a signed contract, some families, individuals rather, they decide to make payments. And so while they're making the payments, one aspect that has become very, very popular and is doing quite well is that for the time that you're paying for your funeral arrangement, you are also insured for the cost of those services. So say, for instance, we do a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, or a 7-year pay. In the event that a death takes place after 24 months of having that product, whatever the balance of that funeral is remaining, the insurance company will pay that off. Once the services have been paid in full, you receive a statement from the provider stating that the services have been paid, and that is a policy, literally, covering your expenses that you can take anywhere within the continental U.S. and use that to conduct your funeral services.
Okay. I think that answers the next question I was going to have, which is what happens if a person passes before they make a final payment?
Yes, so that is why it's important to do the insured plan. Now, there is a product that is called annuity. It's an annuity payment. And in that instance, it's really dollar for dollar. Someone just says, I want to give $1,000 this month. Next month, I want to give another $1,000. So in those instances, when the product is not insured, then when the death occurs prior to it being paid in full, that is when the family would be responsible for a balance.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there populations or groups that are affected by end-of-life preparation differently than others? And if so, can you share how they're impacted?
Yeah, I'm going to say that, people of color, we historically have not been prepared when this time comes. And again, it comes down to having the conversation. I don't know where the fear came from or how it evolved, but as a people, we just don't like to have the conversation. Even in my family, my wife and I, we own a funeral home. Mm-hmm. And we serve the community, but she does not like to talk about if something happens to me. And although we've made preparations, but just having that conversation. So I think it is an emotional piece to it that people of color we just shun the idea of having this conversation. I think because of that, we are at a disadvantage. I've been in the business for 30 years, and I'm seeing now where we have really gotten into the practice of pre-planning. It is changing. And I think that's due to a lot of seminars, information being provided through different fraternal or sorority organizations. Church groups have meetings to discuss these things because churches are oftentimes caught in the middle of having to assist someone plan a service. And certainly if there aren't sufficient funds, families will quite often look to the church to make a donation. So what we've seen because of the differentiation of it, or the lack of desire to get involved in pre-planning, we've seen again churches and organizations really lay out a platform to where this information is now being shared more frequently than it ever has.
Yeah. I definitely think that churches and culture in general has shifted a lot of the ways we see conversations and different topics over the years.
Mm-hmm.
I am curious to know if we talk specifically about like demographics who are LGBTQIA or folks who have been impacted by HIV, how have you seen attitudes towards these demographics shift over the last 30 years when it comes to end-of-life care?
Right. So I remember when I entered the industry, it was at the height of, AIDS. So from the care that was provided when someone transitioned with AIDS to what type of service was going to be offered. I've had conversations with my colleagues recently since COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And when we first entered COVID, for those of us who've been in the industry long enough, it really brought back memories of how things were when it came to HIV. So, but the change has been that it has certainly been an evolving. And so, whereas I remember early on, 30 years ago, cremation was the only method that was encouraged if someone passed away with HIV or AIDS. And so now we have traditional services that has changed, over the last 30 years. So there's no more fear, if you will, from the industry to provide the same care. Not that their care would be lacking, but the same type of service, if you will, that the rest of the population has been receiving. One of the other things, a great aspect, is that for a long time, individuals with HIV or AIDS could not be entitled to having a pre-planned package unless they just paid it outright in full. There was no covering them with insurance. It was the underwriting would shoot it down. But today, the plans that I'm sharing with you, the individuals who are HIV positive, that is not AIDS. And so you are eligible to be placed in one of these plans. And we do it on a regular basis.
Yeah, thank you. What criteria must be met to qualify for life insurance and alternative end-of-life accommodations? So, for example, people without insurance or individuals with pre-existing conditions.
So people without insurance, certainly there's an application. And that application is going to discuss, of course, your age, your weight, height, and some health questions that you have to pass in order to become insured. The pre-planned services are similar in that you do have health questions. However, they do not negate you from being able to participate in the program. Sometimes there is called a graded benefit, meaning there might be a slight bit of an increase in your premium. However, you're still covered.
So if for any reason a family or individual changes their mind about funeral arrangements, are they eligible for a refund?
They are. So here's the entire basis for that. So there are two types of prearrangements that you can be involved in. The first is a revocable prearrangement, meaning at any point in time, you can cancel that prearrangement and get a refund. If it's an irrevocable prearrangement, that is where you cannot get a refund. And I'll share with you why revocable is the way that it is. Revocable prearrangements are put in place for individuals who could very well be going into long-term healthcare situations. And because the federal government will only allow you to have a certain amount of assets, when the pre-need is irrevocable, that means the government cannot count any money that you have in this pre-need policy as an asset of yours. And so that's why, a lot of times yourself and maybe some of your colleagues have had parents or even grandparents that have had to go into a long care health facility. Before they could do that, they literally had to get rid of all of their assets.
Right.
And so that protects irrevocable pre-need, protects that individual from having to use those funds, or those funds will not qualify as an asset for them. The revocable is just the opposite. At any point in time, if you decide to cancel that prearrangement, you can. And I think most instances, there's like a 10% fee that is maintained from the paperwork that has taken place in order to establish the pre-need.
Okay. You mentioned a little earlier, you provided some steps that folks can take if they want to be proactive in making arrangements and being prepared for end-of-life planning. Are there any ways that would change, or any additional steps that you would suggest folks take if it's someone who is making those plans without family?
Yes. So for instance, here in the state of North Carolina, we have, as a part of our prearrangement plans, as well as our cremation plans, an individual can sign a section of the document, putting in place exactly what they want, ensuring that no changes can be made to that, as long as they've provided a method of payment for that. Nothing can be done to deter or change what they put in place. Excuse me. And quite oftentimes, I meet with people who are in that very situation. They don't have any family, and they'll come to me and they'll say, Mr. Terrell, this is what I want. I need to make sure that in the event of my passing, it's carried out to the T. And so what we do, I instruct them to initial that particular section of the pre-need application so that it protects myself and my company when we proceed based on the wishes of the individual who's put these things in place. The other thing that can really be helpful, in addition to the pre-need, is to create a will. A will give explicit instructions on what is to happen when you pass away. So that document, in addition to the prearrangement, I suggest anybody who does not have family, it's just them, that they put those two things in place: a will, and then meet with a funeral director, prepare the prearrangement, and then sign off on, no changes being made to these selections. that they must be carried out as, that person has put forth.
Thank you.
Mhm.
What resources for the indigent or unhoused population do you recommend to help prepare for afterlife preparations?
So here in North Carolina, where we are, especially specifically in New Hanover County, unfortunately, there aren't any indigent organizations that provide assistance for indigent families other than social services. Social services, when a person passes away and the deceased is unclaimed, then they will come in and provide a cremation. Excuse me. So that is the only thing. There are states, Maryland, New Jersey, that have sufficient funds in place to provide for a funeral service. But North Carolina, unfortunately, is not one of them. And I would say for individuals who are watching this in other states, to check with social services in your specific state and in the county that you live to find out, in the event that something happens to the indigent, what is available for them. So it varies from region to region.
I know you mentioned COVID-19 a little bit earlier, and wanted to ask you if you've observed any shifts or changes in the process of end-of-life care since the onset of COVID-19.
Yes, a lot more people are coming in. We, on a consistent basis, we have families that will call us to schedule appointments to come in and make their arrangements. That was a very, daunting time for the world. And there was really a shift in people beginning to have the discussion about being prepared. And we're still seeing the increase from that. So although it's not where I think it should be, I can honestly say, with the number of people that we're meeting with weekly, COVID definitely helped to bring about the idea of having this discussion. So it certainly has increased.
What do you think would what do you think would take to bring it to a place where there's less stigma, where people are more comfortable to have this conversation?
I think that, I think we learn from our ancestors. We learn our grandparents, our parents. And so I think at some point, a generation will just have to stand up and say, this is an important part of life. As for this family, these are things that we're going to discuss. And I think that if it's taught early, then each generation will become more comfortable with it. But because grandparents, parents seem squeamish about discussing this, it trickles down. So just like it's trickled down negatively, I think there can be a positive impact if, again, your generation, my generation, say from this point forward, these are conversations that we're going to have. And it literally will spread from family to family, but it has to start.
Yeah. So we know that you've been in business for 30 years and you serve communities in Wilmington and Brunswick County, as well as Jacksonville. Can you share what you're most proud of in the service you provided for families over the years?
I would say the proudest moments are when families, when their services are concluded and they greet you, men and women alike, with a hug and a thank you.
Yeah.
That's it, because we're here to serve, and we're here to assist a family in one of the most difficult moments in their lives, and to know that they were treated in such a way that they feel appreciation for that, then I mean, that's it.
Yeah. I am curious to know about something you shared earlier. You were saying that
Sure.
you had like an interest and a curiosity from a very young age.
Mhm.
And because some generations and some families have an aversion to death and talking about death, I'm
Mhm.
curious to know how that was received in your community, your interest.
So my maternal grandmother, she went to a lot of funerals. So I was always with her. And by the time I decided I wanted to do this for a living, and my father really became aware of it, it terrified him because he did not want anything to do with death and dying. That was just, it was like, why do you want to do this? And so not until his mother passed away and I provided the services for her did he come to me and say, you are doing what you're supposed to do.
Mm.
And from that moment on, he was less squeamish and he would at least have the discussion. And I think for the family as a whole, especially on my father's side, they opened up a lot more to having a conversation. My mother's side of the family, it was always insurance, insurance. Got insurance. Prepaying for cemetery. So, had two backgrounds, but to see it come full circle, with my dad, that it brought about a change, and so I was grateful to be a part of that with him.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read a few of the comments that folks have put in from both the webinar and folks who are watching from Facebook.
Okay.
And I want to remind folks, if you have questions that have not been asked so far, please feel free to drop them in the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
First person is saying, I'm so glad this is being recorded because this is a wealth of knowledge most people are unaware of. I know I was. Someone else is saying, it is uncomfortable talking about the death of a loved one before they pass. And another person is saying, because of resources, services are expensive. Marginalized communities may consider saving for services a luxury or having dispensable income. That I haven't heard that perspective, but that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think that in some instances, it is a stretch when something happens to be prepared. But the one piece of information that I like to share with the young families, if you take an insurance policy out on your children when they're infants, a small $10,000 policy with most companies, and by the time they're an adult, there are policies out there that policy would be paid in full by the time they're an adult. So those funds would always be there. And so to get it when they're young is the key.
Yeah.
And that's with all insurance. If you do it when they're young, then it's affordable. But trying to insure a 50, 60-year-old, with health issues, it gets expensive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I remember you mentioning that you had several projects going on, and I didn't know if, in addition to the work that you're providing to so many communities, if you also have some kind of involvement in education or outreach to give people more awareness of the issue.
Yes. So all three locations, we target different communities. Again, different groups and organizations will request that we come out. I've done this year a few men's conferences. The churches have had men's conferences, and they've asked me to come out and speak to the men of the church, because that's often where the the fear resides, believe it or not. The men don't want to have that conversation. So I've seen an increase in that, speaking to men's groups. And then I've seen fraternities, sororities. So right now we're pretty engaged in just going out and sharing the information. And I think that, again, by having these these conversations in these settings, it really opens individuals' eyes to what's available. And after they understand what's available, then they realize it's really not as bad as they thought, because some people may think that it's just overly expensive, but it doesn't have to be. You select your service. You maintain what you want to take place when that time comes. And you do that within a budget that you are comfortable with.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. We have a couple questions from Facebook.
Okay.
First question, are your sons interested in the business?
Believe it or not, no. When we came and purchased the business here, we've always shared with them that they are to live their dream. It was understood that this was my dream. And will they help me? Yes. And they do. But they don't have a passion for the industry. Their role, they support, but they're not interested in being funeral directors.
Another question is asking, is it also because of resources that services are expensive?
I would not say, well, I guess if the person desiring to have a service is limited in their resources, then it can be expensive. But again, I think the critical thing to do is to have the conversation, because I have people that come into the funeral home and they'll think that this is going to be, a huge expense. But once they share what they want to take place, and then we give them options. And so there's always something there that meets the need of each individual. And so once we go through all the options, and then they'll walk away and say, well, this wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
So again, I think before you draw that conclusion about the expense, I think the best thing for anyone to do is to start the conversation. Sit down with a funeral service professional and put that plan together. And I think a lot of people would be surprised as to what is available to them, if they just start the process.
You mentioned early some differences between North Carolina and other states with the indigent and the unhoused populations.
Mm-hmm.
What other differences do you notice within the state of North Carolina with how other states handle end-of-life care?
But honestly, I think that that is probably going to be the major difference, because I lived in Maryland for some years, lived and worked in Virginia. So those states had programs that a family could use, and it would provide for a very simple burial service, and it would take care of the necessities. When I came to North Carolina, and I remember inquiring because I was, trying to provide some assistance for a family. And once I found out that that was it, social services will only after a certain amount of time come in and provide an immediate cremation. Then I just thought that to be very, very different from what I'd experienced early on in my career. So I would say, as it relates to the indigent, that is, that's it. It's just different.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is a different answer than what you just shared about social services, but a question from Facebook says, what happens if they come in and need a funeral and there are no funds?
So if they are in need of a funeral and there are no funds, then we try to work with the family to come up with something that they can accomplish. So that family may desire to have a traditional funeral service, but if cremation with a memorial is what they can afford and meets their budget, then we work with them to plan, just as meaningful of a memorial service for them as if we were having a traditional service. So again, it's having the conversation. Now, if there aren't any funds at all, then in that instance, we would have to, on behalf of the family, we would let them know, but, we would have to contact social services because we can only maintain someone for a certain amount of time in our care and not having provided, a proper disposition for them.
Are there any in addition to social services, are there any nonprofits or other organizations that you know of in North Carolina that offer any services or financial support?
They're not. When it comes to funeral services, no. Only, I see a lot for children who pass away from cancer. There are organizations that will help with children, especially if they spent time in Durham at the children at the cancer center. There are some veteran groups that would provide some assistance for veterans. But beyond those special niches, there's not an organization that has come forward offering that.
I did want to ask, want to remind folks that if they have any additional questions, they can drop them in the chat box. But I want to ask, is there anything that I haven't brought up today that you want folks to know?
I would just say, I think we've covered everything. You've been very thorough, great questions. I would just end with, don't be afraid to at least begin the process. It's not going to hurt to just see what is available. And until you start, you won't know. So again, just begin. That's my word. Just start. And however minimal it is, have the conversation, and then choose to be the game changer in your family, in setting the tone for being prepared.
Thank you. I did want to just share one comment that someone shared in the chat. They were the poster is a Native person, and they were saying Natives have always instilled that hospitals are the place you go to die, and didn't really trust Western medicine and wanted younger generations to stick with traditional medicines. And then they were referring to their father and said it cost them $3,000 to get them buried, and the tribe helped with the expense. So it sounded like this person's tribe was very active.
Mm-hmm.
And
so,
they got funding from the VA.
Okay, yes. So again, a veteran, there are funds available for veterans. Special groups will come in and provide assistance. And if the veteran is a disabled vet, meaning that they're receiving, the military has deemed them disabled, and they're receiving monthly benefits for that disability, the VA will provide a certain amount as a reimbursement towards a funeral service of a disabled veteran. So that means that once the funeral bill has been paid,
Right.
the family is to present that veteran's DD 214 along with a copy of the funeral bill and death certificate, and then the VA will determine what portion of those expenses that they're going to reimburse the family.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, I've appreciated this conversation. I've learned a lot. I know our viewers have as well. So just really grateful to have you here today, Mr. Terrell.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Anytime we can share more information and try to get families and individuals a little bit more comfortable with having this conversation, and I'm all for it because being prepared, there's nothing better.
Thank you. I'll
Mm,
pass it back to you, Destiny.
All right. Thank you both so much for such an important conversation around what is often seen as such a hard topic for most.
Mhm.
And thank you everyone for attending the webinar this evening. As mentioned at the beginning, here is a program survey in the chat. If you would take a moment to fill that out for us, we would really appreciate it. We encourage everyone to sign up for So Time and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for updates on upcoming webinars and join our mailing list